Hi guys, and thanks for joining me for another episode of the Kevin Moore Show. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Richard Rokeby. Now, Richard is a writer, a researcher with a keen interest in history, mystery, and forbidden knowledge. Now, Richard has previously served in the British Army and the UK Police. Richard is the author of The Lights Upon the Hills, the Burton Dassett UFO events of 1923. Now, in the UK in the winter of 1923, the Warwickshire countryside experienced a series of UFO sightings seen by hundreds of people. Now, they described them as bright multicolored lights with the power to illuminate buildings and to fly at heights before disappearing at fantastic speeds. Now, Richard joins me to discuss The Lights Upon the Hills, the Burton Dassett story. Richard Rokeby, thank you for joining us.
That's no problem, Kevin. Thanks for asking me.
So, Richard, obviously, what's interesting about the introduction here to this show is that you're actually serving right now in the police force, aren't you? You're actually still in the UK
Yes.
police force, yeah. Okay, and
Yes.
that's one of the reasons why we've not got your picture on there as well, is because obviously, whatever you're doing in the police force, you don't want to be on camera right now. Do you think when you retire that may be different, or?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, possibly, depending on what I decide to do. What I decide to do next. So the ufology is a passion of mine, like most people that get involved in it. But I tend to just have a bit of a firewall between that and my work.
Before you came on here, actually, I didn't know that you were still serving. For some reason in my head, I just had it that you had retired, maybe, or you'd left the police force in a previous job. But okay. So where did you actually train to study criminology then?
So I studied criminology through Oxford College. So it was a diploma in criminology, which I did just to sort of enhance my work as a detective. And I did that, I think, around about 2006, 2007. And it is very interesting. It doesn't. Well, it gives you a bit more depth of knowledge when dealing with incidents and investigations. Doesn't particularly direct your investigation, but it just gives you another view, I guess, and it another level of complexity to what you're doing, and understanding, greater understanding and knowledge of it all.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, it's. I'm guessing then that you've used some of those skills into what you've done with this book. Then, the Burton Dassett UFO event of 1923. Have you applied some of those skills that you've been training for all those years?
Yes. Yeah, a bit. I mean, I'd say like 80% of detective work is just communication, really. It's being able to speak to people and getting out and about and listening to what people are telling you and collecting those accounts and looking through information and trying to establish links between what seem to be separate events or separate bits of information. So that's where I brought it into what I do around ufology, really. And it is a bit like an investigation, and I enjoy investigation. So I just took a bit of what I knew, some of the structures around being a detective, and then just applied that to my research, really, for this book.
So why a book on a UFO event in 1923? What is the relevance of such an old case?
Good question. So I do say, well, this story sort of found me. So I moved from London to Warwickshire to live. And when I first got to Warwickshire, I was reading some local history. And one of the books I picked up was a ghost story, The Ghosts of Warwickshire, by a local researcher and historian called Betty Smith. And within that book, there was lots of chapters around your traditional ghost stories, so grey ladies and carriages, ghostly carriages, and sort of scary dogs. But there was one chapter which was called The Lights of Burton Dassett, and it when I read it, to me it just didn't sound like a ghost story. There was a couple of accounts within there, but she described in the book people seeing lights that moved on the hills and that travelled at fairly sort of steady paces and were white lights capable of illuminating a house. And I read it, and I always had a general interest in ufology, and I thought that to me sounds more like a UFO event. And it just story stayed with me for about 20 years, and then I got to a point where I thought, well, I could put a bit more time and effort into that story. So I took the book and I took the newspaper reports that were mentioned at the time, and then did some field investigation in the area as well, and just found these sort of links. So the story itself was quite interesting, but then I found links to other places within the area, such as the church and the military base and the hills themselves, and just felt it was all a good story to tell. So I originally wrote the account, and spoke to Philip Mantle from Flying Dassett Press, and he said, "Oh well, I think it'll make a good book." So he was very, very helpful and gave us a bit of coaching, and we brought it into quite a concise book. It's not a big book. It's quite a concise book, but I was keen just to concentrate on the account itself rather than drifting off too far away. And the why I think it's important, Kevin, I mean, that was your original question, is it occurred before in 1923 when aircraft and motor vehicles and everything like that was in its infancy, so it couldn't really get mixed up for anything else. And there was no drones, there was no everything's a witness account from some credible witnesses. So that rules out a lot of the explanations or hypotheses that you get around modern ufology, particularly around drones and is it a that's been tampered with, etc. So that's why I felt it was important, and it is quite rare to have an event from that sort of time.
Did you go back to look at past newspapers, the newspapers of the times? Were you able to sort of trace any articles back to 1923?
So the original source documents are very difficult to get hold of. So I did contact the Banbury Gazette, but they didn't contact me back, unfortunately. So what I took my accounts from was the original, the Betty Smith book, and from the local newsletters that were written about the incident, and the Times themselves, the Times paper, they did an article, I think it was around about 2005, about it. So the source material I found was quite difficult to get hold of.
Why was the Times doing an article in 2005?
Well, yeah, because at the time, 1923, it did cause a big stir, and the Banbury Gazette ran these two articles around the events. And a lot I detail in the book sort of 8 different accounts from the material I got. It's likely that hundreds of people saw these lights, and it was a sort of bit of an event around that time because of spiritualism and medium, the people speaking to mediums, etc. Then if a report of a ghost or anything that was unusual was seen, then people would take their Sunday afternoons out to go and try and spot these lights or unusual events. So, and this was one of the bigger ones, I think. So there's always been this interest around it, and yeah, the Times ran an article about it. The journalists there ran an article about it, and just through my research, I sort of found it again. And they like the Banbury Gazette in 1923 said it's probably marsh gas or swamp gas, and that was the hypothesis that they sort of came up with, which for reasons that I cover in the book, I don't believe it was. Marsh gas is very difficult to recreate and moves in different ways anyway. But so I think there was a lot of interest about it, and every so often there's another view is taken of it. But I don't think anybody had looked at it through the lens of ufology before. I think that's where my book is unique. That nobody had thought, well, could it be UFOs?
So what was that book you mentioned just there as well previously?
Yeah, so it was Betty Smith's The Ghost of Warwickshire, and that was the first time I'd saw the story, and she was a very well-known local historian in Warwickshire, and she said she'd done a number of different accounts and different local legend stories, and this was just one in there that sort of stuck with me.
How old is that book that you sourced, the Betty?
So that was from around about 1997, I think. So it was first written in 1997, and then she detailed the Banbury Gazette articles, and then there was a newsletter that was produced by Fenny Compton around about 2001, 2002. In fact, it might be 2003, in line with like sort of the 80-year anniversary, which again went back to the Banbury Gazette articles. I'm fairly sure they're around somewhere, but just trying to get hold of them is quite difficult. And the Banbury Gazette still exists, but you can go online and you can look at articles from around that time. But I think the last one was from around about 1926. So they don't keep all the days. They don't keep every copy of every day, which is a bit of a shame. But I'll keep on doing the research, and one day I might get the original. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So was that the only sort of source material that you had for this?
So there was that, and there's local stories as well. So from the Ghost of Warwickshire book, Betty Smith had collected stories from people, and it was being passed down. So the two named witnesses, if you like, a local people. One's called Henry White. It was a local man that went out onto the hills to try and see these lights for himself, and he said he was took two friends with him, and he saw the lights. And what he actually said was the lights flew over him. And he felt them go over them. So from that account, I think that's quite an interesting account, because that suggests some sort of change in atmosphere, some sort of downward pressure, to say that he felt it. And then the other chap was a bloke called Henry Cottrell, who was a stable boy, worked locally, and he gives the account of walking through an area. And he sees near where there's a pond at North End. That pond doesn't exist anymore, but he saw a blue light above a pond which scared the horse. So I think that's where the marsh gas angle comes from, because marsh gas is generally seen around water. So they're sort of our two named witnesses. Neither of them live in the area, unfortunately. Neither of the relatives live in the area anymore. I did try and sort of find local people that might have known them, but not with much luck, unfortunately.
Yeah, anyone that was local in 1923, not that you found any descendants of any family members, basically local.
Yeah, that's right. You'd expect now people are more transient, and I did speak to people, currently, whether these things still are going on. There was I spoke to a park ranger there, because it's now a sort of a park, a country park, and I was speaking to him for a bit, and I was asking him about, he sort of worked there for 2 or 3 years. Have you ever seen any strange lights or anything on the hills or anything? And he frantically searched through a big pile of papers he had in front of him as if looking for something, and then said, "No, I haven't." And I always wondered what he was looking for, whether he had just made a note or something and then decided against it. And then I spoke to a barmaid at one of the local pubs, seeing if there's any unusual events. And she said to me, all I know is the Knights Templar buried all their treasure on Burton Dassett Hills, and then left it at that. So that was sort of a tantalizing bit of information. But she seemed deadly serious about it. Yeah. She seemed deadly serious about it.
Okay. Well, go
so
ahead.
yeah. So and then in the book, we did. So part of my research has been out at different times of the day and night, just to see what I can see. And on one occasion, I did have a really strange event where there was a noise, a bit like a VW Beetle engine, but magnified incredibly, just all around me, and it was incredible experience. And I'm not sure what it was, but that happened about 3:00 in the morning on a February night. So it's a very strange but beautiful and compelling area.
I can imagine it is, actually. I've seen some footage online of the hill, the Burton Dassett area in the hill, and it looks, in the summertime, it just looks beautiful. So but I know you did some of your reconnaissance work in the winter time, is that right? So it was a bit colder.
Yeah. Yes, most of the sightings starting from December 1922 to February 1923. So I was keen to get out at that sort of period, and also because of that time, then the marsh gas explanation again doesn't really hold much water, because marsh gas tends to be around hot, damp places rather than cold places, and I can testify that it is cold up there 3:00 in the morning in February.
Right. No, I can imagine it is. Yeah. What's really drawn you into this case? I know I've asked that in a different way at the beginning of this interview, but what is it about this that is really pulling you? Has pulled you to make this book?
Yeah, I just felt it was a story that needed to be told, really, because of the ufology history and what everybody's trying to do to try and get to the truth of it all. Within ufology, I do think there was a lot of white noise. There's some really interesting cases, but there's a lot of white noise that you've got to cut out. And I just felt with this story, because it's before all things like drones and mobile phones, and I just felt it was important. And there is a couple of other incidents that are recorded around that time. There was one in Hull, and I think it was about 1901. And there's various talks about which people know about, around about 1933 with the ghost ships in Scandinavia, etc. But in England in that time, there's not a great deal of accounts.
Right. That is true.
So I just felt as though someone should know about it. I mean, I've had an interest in ufology, but I wouldn't class myself as a huge ufologist. I'm no massive expert on the subject, but I've always had an interest, and going through the book has helped me with that. But I just felt people should know about it, and then people can have a look and decide for themselves. And if they think it's credible, then it pushes the story back quite significantly, I think. And the church as well. So the church is really important to the story, and I felt as though that the church was trying to say something about the area. So within the church, there's these unusual carvings and unusual paintings.
So if we just go to the that time frame of 1922, 1923. Now, the Great War, the First World War, that ended, I believe it was November 1918. Okay, so I think that's significant to say that as well, because it was the times that this took place, obviously. And what was the area like, just after the First World War? Well, I mean, I guess there was less men in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But does that have any bearing on the story?
Yeah, I think it does, Kevin. I think it's a really good point that, and I alluded to it earlier, that just after the World War, Warwickshire was affected by the First World War as much as any county, and the regimental county recruiting systems of the First World War, such as the Pals Battalion, which were sort of linked with Birmingham and other areas, and the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, they were increased massively through the First World War, so much that a regiment would have 3 battalions to a regiment, and you'd maybe that would be a lot. Well, they increased it tenfold, so you'd have 10 regiments, for example, of Royal Regiment of Warwickshire. Each regiment would have 3 to 4 battalions. I mean, the scale of it is unbelievable, and unless you look into the First World War. But because of the county recruiting systems, if a certain regiment of the Royal Warwickshires were involved in a battle on a particular day, then that whole area could lose its menfolk. Fathers, brothers, uncles would get killed in the same action. So it would hit an area really hard. Consequently, spiritualism, this idea that the people left behind wanted to get in touch with their sons, which was probably inherited from the American Civil War, actually. That was the first time spiritualism became really popular. It was after the American Civil War. But the spiritualism wanted to get media and use the use of mediums to try and speak to their sons and husbands and fathers was a real draw to people. The spiritualism churches were taking off. So, as I said, when there was any hint or information about possible ghosts being seen somewhere, people wanted to go up onto the hills to see if they could see them themselves, to reinforce their own beliefs. Well, if there is a ghost floating around Burton Dassett Hill, then just as likely, my son is a ghost somewhere and I can make contact with them. So I think some of the hysteria around the lights was caused by that. Lots of people were going up there and seeing them, and you can completely understand why they would do that. And if they felt that they got some satisfaction from seeing their lights, felt as though they were taking them a bit closer to us, then all power to them. But if that was an interpretation, great. If they went away happy, brilliant. But what I think I'm seeing is, looking at it through what we know now around the UFO and UAP phenomenon, it looks to be something else. If you take these people and the accounts that we've got as being credible, and very often they've got no reason to make these things up, then what they're describing really is a UAP event.
If you just go over then what exactly that took place over those couple of days, and I mean, you've kind of mentioned it in a way that people thought they were sort of, they thought it was some sort of, ghosts in the sky, right? But that's not what you discovered from some of the bits that you put together. These were lights, in a sense, and that's why you've kind of poured it to ufology.
Yeah. So what was described? We've always mentioned Henry White, and he describes white balls of light which he felt travel over him. Other people described a ball of light that illuminated their house, so much so that it was as if you could read by. I think my favourite witness is a railwayman who works for a railway company in Warwickshire, very responsible job, in a signal booth, which is designed to give all around visibility, so nothing happens to the trains. And he describes how he saw a bright oval shape come over to him and stop in front of his signal box, and it caused him so much discomfort, I suppose, and intrigue, that he rang the local police. And he must have been pretty convincing on the phone, because the local police sent out 2 police officers in a car, which was quite unusual then, to see what had gone on. And he describes how this light just came over, stopped outside of his signal box, and then moved off back towards the hills. So in 1923, what else is there? What else is there that can act and do that? So I mean that's just a couple of the counts, but it was mainly bluish white lights, sometimes red, but generally bluey white.
And were they
Um,
were they scanning for something? Were they trying to look for something?
well, so I think if you read the accounts, it certainly looks like that they're moving sometimes on their own, sometimes in pairs, sometimes they're going up and down, described as hither and dither in the sort of language of the time. And certainly, there's one account says that the lights came and illuminated a house as if they were looking for something. So it could be they were looking for something. It could be they were just drawn to the area because it's for people that don't know Warwickshire very well, it's rolling countryside. It's a beautiful part of the world, but it's rolling countryside until you get to the Burton Dassett Hills, which is 5 hills, really quite prominent in the area. And for whatever reason, maybe they were just pulled to that area because of the geography, or it was also known for iron ore. So they used to have quite a big railway network, and iron was taken from the hills and used in the railways and various factories. So it could be something around that drew them there. But it seems to me as though they had been going there for centuries. Perhaps I think what the church is telling us is that something unusual has been going on in that area for some time. So it could be that we're searching for resources. There's just one account where it says there was a figure seen in the lights. The rest of the time seems to be balls of light. So, my hypothesis perhaps is there was some sort of drones. I don't think they were particularly occupied, but I think they had a task to do and congregated on this sort of area.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like you said previously as well, that there was other sightings around the same time or around a couple of years before. I mean, you mentioned sightings in Kingston upon Hull over the Humber in the UK, but I mean, is that the same time frame or?
So that was around about. No, it was different. It was around about, I think I said 1901 earlier, when it was about 1801. Yeah, 1801 is the whole. So that was a moon. There was a report of a moon with like a bar through it over the River Humber, and then local reports said it split off into 5 different balls and went to different areas. You've got the airships. You've got reports of airships in New Zealand around about 1909, mysterious airships. Then we've got the Miracle of Fatima, of course, which is 1917, which is a fantastic event. Could be religious significance, maybe something else. And then jumping forward, you've got these sort of ghost ships, 1933 or so onwards, passing over Scandinavia and Norway, but described as looking like normal aircraft, but without any markings on them. So is that something to do with Germany, something to do with Russia? But what the 1923 event is it's what a modern ufologist would recognize as a UFO or as an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Bright lights moving around. So and I do sort of draw comparisons in the book with the Foo Fighters, which again is another 10 years on from the 1933 events.
Right. And I mean, at that time, I mean, we're talking about a couple of years after the end of World War One. There were some planes in the sky, but I mean, they weren't that sophisticated. I guess they were noisy. I guess you would have told the
Yeah, so
tell
you
the
still
difference.
we have basically still biplanes at that stage in 1923. Noisy, smelly, big. Not at particularly high altitudes compared with modern planes. So and easy recognizable. And air flight really, the Zeppelins had gone by then. Really, they weren't particularly. They were still around, but they were few and far between, and they're very distinctive. But there was nothing else at that time that moved or looked like, the lights that people are describing.
Yeah. Now, I believe your wife's an archaeologist, and you've taken her down to the Burton Dassett hill, or the area. And what does she make out from the sense of, like, how long has there been any past civilizations there? Basically, do you know what I mean? That date back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
So the local history of Burton Dassett would say that there was a Saxon settlement on top of the hill at some point, which there probably was. But if you go up to Burton Dassett, you see a lot of these sort of nicks and pock marks out of the surface, which I think have been attributed to Saxon buildings. There's also a Saxon burial site out there. But my wife, who's far more intelligent than I am, took one look at the area and said, it doesn't look like what it looks like is mining. That's basically what it looks like, whether they've been after the iron ore or whatever. But it does add to the interest of the area. So there is a graveyard, a grave site, a Saxon grave burial site that was found there, which looked like there had been a battle there. I think there was about 30 skeletons recovered. And then there was the village was, did have a degree of prosperity through the Middle Ages until the bubonic plague sort of hit it. So for your listeners that don't know the area, I'm expecting that they think it's something like the Yorkshire Moors, where it's miles big, but it isn't. It's a lot that you've got a lot compact into a very small area. So, which I think adds to the interest of the place as well, I think.
Why did you turn your effort then to the church?
So yes, so the church is there. It's All Saints Church, and it's known as the Cathedral of the Cotswolds. And it was it started off as a fairly small church. Had the sort of Norman nave that people would recognise, and then it did get a bit of investment during the Middle Ages, when the village, Burton Dassett village, did receive, started getting a few people living there and had a marketplace. And when you go into it, you can't help but notice it's quite sparse but expansive, is how I describe it. So as you walk in, it's got the very high ceilings. It's got what you would typically know as a church, with the fonts and the seats set up and the altar at the eastern side, etc. But what makes it quite unique is it has a selection of carvings. So on the pillars on the north side of the church, so the north side of the church traditionally was what was termed the evil side. So it was the side that would face evil and keep evil out. So that's why they sometimes had gargoyles and carvings, etc., on that side. So that, whether it's coincidence, it's probably just coincidence, but that side also faces the hills, the Burton Dassett hills. And these carvings are quite unusual because they depict animals that are upside down. They depict the Green Man. So the Green Man in a church is not unheard of, but it is quite unusual, and it does tend to signify in a church the joining together of two cultures, so the pagan culture and the that of Christianity joining together. So that's generally why the pagan man is used. But it also shows some hybrid creatures, so half man and half animal creatures. So they're absolutely beautifully carved, date from around about the 14th century. And you don't find that many of them. And then that's coupled with the pictures. So the artwork is in there as well in the in the church, and there is perhaps what you'd expect. So there's two larger than life figures just near the altar of the church. One is the Virgin Mary, and the other one is Saint Michael. and they're being preserved, absolutely fantastically. And then more to do with our story, or my story. Around the corner, just off to a side, there is a depiction of two kings, or what could be described as wise men or magi as well. So one of the pictures is really unusual because it shows what we think is Saint Ethelbert, and he's holding his own head, and that was because history tells us he was beheaded in 794 once he angered the king of Mercia, and following a battle, he was beheaded. And then the other image is reported to be either Saint Oswald, who was again king of Northumbria, who was killed at the Battle of Oswentry in 642 AD, or a wise man. And the link to the wise man is because this king has in his possession a orb, and I don't want to give too much away. We like people to read and enjoy the book, but there was something unusual about that orb, I think, that is telling a story of the area, and he is often depicted with an orb as Saint Oswald, but very rarely in the way it's depicted on the church in All Saints. But what's amazing is it survived. So if for the Reformation and Puritanism got rid of a lot of these sort of these fantastic drawings that would have been in churches, but these have survived through the ages. So I just think that the church is really interesting, and I think it's telling us something, a bit like the Roslin Chapel in Scotland. It's telling us something about that area. There's a reason why the people of the 12th and 13th century decided to depict these kings as they are.
It's interesting. Now, do you have a website at all?
I don't, Kim, but I do have a Facebook account. So just Richard Rokeby, if people want to search that. And yeah, by all means, I'm more than happy to speak to people if they're interested in the book and tell them about it. And like anything, it's we live and learn, don't we? So I'm always trying to build up some more information about this interesting story.
Absolutely. So, okay, interesting with the depictions on the walls. I mean, yeah, it's it makes you think that there might be a connection there somewhere, but you're just putting the facts out as you've sort of found it, and maybe there's not a connection. Do you know what I mean? Maybe there's not, but it does show that if it was to be true, that maybe this has been going on for a long time there. That's my point.
Yes, I think so, and yeah, it's a good point that, Kevin. This isn't this is the world according to Richard. This is my view from my research. I do think it's a really unusual area, and when you add in the geography of the hills, when you add, if you wanted a checklist of unusual things you'd want for UFO activity, all you're missing is a military base. Oh, I tell you what, we've got one of them as well. So there's a military base directly opposite the hills. So I think this is, when you put it all together, there is something really unusual has going on there, maybe for hundreds of years. And there's a lot of anomalies in that area that makes it, what I think is a really interesting story.
But is that military base, was that there in the 20s? Was that military base there for the First World War?
No, it wasn't. So the military, MOD Kyneton arrived 1941 as originally as a transit depot. It was used as a prison of war camp for a bit, but it's now used as a military storage area for munitions. So it holds around about 60% of all the military munitions that the Army, Air Force, and Navy use. It's a huge site, 2,200 acres, and it's got lots of train lines, around 76 miles worth of train track just on the site alone. which it then can move ammunition sort of around the area. And it is quite unusual because it holds high density explosive housing storage, EHSs, which are used for the very largest types of ammunition. Sorry.
Well, bringing that into the story here, right? I mean, where does that connect with the story right now then?
Okay, so if you look at ufology and some of the more famous incidents, such as Roswell and Rendlesham, it tends to follow around military bases, but military bases that have links to nuclear weapons. So the nuclear weapons, and I don't know this for sure, and as I say in the book, I don't really want to know, but tactical battlefield nuclear weapons are likely to be stored in these types of areas that hold high density explosive housing storage. So where I think it links in with my story is, once again, we've got a UFO event in an area and then a military base not too far away, literally a stone's throw away. So is that connected? And so, as somebody pointed out to me, is it because the base was put there because of the event, or was it just coincidence because it's central? Either or. But when you look at the links between UFOs and nuclear storage bases, they do seem to keep coming up, and I don't think really you can ignore it if you put it in with everything else.
No. And has there been any other sightings, from 1923 onwards?
There hasn't been, not that I know of. There's a few people have seen strange objects. There's a picture on the internet which shows an object a bit like the Tic Tac object which we've had from the 2014 sightings moving across, but you can't really make it out. And I said I did my research around the area, and people went rushing over to tell me stories about it. So I don't think there has been a lot of activity there since then. But I just don't. I think, if you think if it's 100 years in 2023, the sort of technologies we're dealing with, what is 100 years? If they even have the understanding of time that we do, if it's transdimensional or something like that, So I don't read too much into it. I think something could happen again because there was something that took them there in 1923. So is there something that can take them again then in 2023? We'll have to wait and see.
Well, then obviously there were people at the time that said that this is probably the marsh gas, or in the US they call it swamp gas. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I just think that it is a bit of a joke, isn't it, amongst ufologists, that if we're not sure what it is, blame it on the marsh gas. So I think they've had and I do detail it in the book. They had an account where there was various lights over a city, and someone had saw a craft, and two people described how this craft looked with metal and orange lights and blue lights, and they said, well, it's probably marsh gas. So I just think it's a bit of a default position, and marsh gas does fit in with this account by the groom that had his horse because it was near a pond. But when you look into how marsh gas is created, it's actually really difficult to do. They've never been able to recreate it in a laboratory conditions. It's to do with hot, damp areas as opposed to freezing cold, wet areas. It does exist, it is a natural phenomenon. You can look at it on YouTube, and it happens very quickly. It's a bit like a blue Bunsen burner in a ball that wavels along for a couple of seconds and fades out. It's not what's being described, I don't think, by the people they've seen it. But if in doubt, blame marsh gas.
Yeah, good old marsh gas. Yeah. Okay. And there was you spoke about, I think, this before, but the Orion connection and what that is in connection with this. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, so when you look at the three most prominent hills, Windmill Hill, Magpie Hill, and Dassett Hill, they're set out in as much as there's sort of two big hills, and then off to the side there's a little hill. And if you look, and it's to do with Orion really. So if you look at February, so when I was doing my field investigations in February, you get a nice clear night. You can't help but notice as you walk up the hills from the North End side, which is North End is one of the villages there. As you walk up, Orion is directly on that time of year. Orion and his belt are directly above the hills. It almost looks like, from certain angles, he's standing on the hill, and however you want to depict him, with his club or holding his the lion sort of skin, however you want to depict him. And it just seemed to me a bit of a strange coincidence that all the sightings were in February, when Orion is most prominent in the sky. Orion has this, where the stars are set up. You've got the two big stars, and then the smaller one off to the left, and it just seems to match the hills and how they're set up. And then if you look at again how that idea of heaven's mirror, which was coined partly by Robert Duvall and sorry, one of the other writers, whose name escapes me. And you've got the three pyramids, which have this similar pattern of two big ones and a small one off to the side. Again, you've got this weird anomaly. Why should it be when most of the sightings were in February? Orion's in the sky, and the three stars of Orion in his belt have a sort of heaven's mirror reflection on the earth of the two hills of Windmill Hill, Magpie Hill, and Beacon or Dassett Hill. And again, it could just be coincidence. It was looking for a reason why these lights were drawn to that area. But I think you're on about earlier on, Kevin, about the detective background and how I bring that into ufology. But you've got to look holistically, and it just seems you've got a number of different anomalies. At the center, you've got these sightings, and then around them, you've got a church that's got unusual carvings and unusual paintings. The other side, you've got a military base that houses, the vast majority of our munitions. You've then got these set of hills that seem to match Orion in February, and I just felt this. The other thing we say is there's no such thing as coincidence. All these things put together, if you look holistically, are telling us something really interesting, and I just felt people should know about it.
No, it's fascinating, the research that you've done, and we've kind of just sort of like tiptoed over some of the main points of the book, but there's much more in the book, obviously, and your book's been coming up on the screen as well. Do you think this will be one of many books that you're going to do in this field, or how are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd like to have another go. I've enjoyed the process. I now know how much work it takes to write a book, the editing and the backwards and forwards, and speaking to interesting people like you. That's great as well. So yes, I would like to do another one. And maybe looking something around. There was an event in Florence, I think it was 1953, where 10,000 football fans saw a cigar-shaped craft just hover over the ground, and it's a little-known case, but I think that would be really interesting to look at further. And it was part of a wave of sightings in Southern Europe around that time, and that's something that's caught me attention.
Florence, wow, that'll be a cool place to have to go and do the research, I guess.
It would. That's what I tell my wife.
Yeah. I bet she can understand that one. No, I bet that'll be Yeah, that'd be amazing if you know, do another book. I'm sure whatever it will be as interesting as this one as well. How would you wrap this up then? I mean, what is the message in this book, do you think, an important message?
I just think that these are the message is there's something happening in this area, and like I've said, other people will take a look at it. It's a concise book. You know, it doesn't sort of take you weeks to read. You could probably read it in a day or so, and just have a look at the area itself and make your own. Form your own opinions as to what you think's gone on there, and please tell me about it. And I think that the message is these events, although they're more recognized, although they're more common now in some ways, they're far more difficult to prove because of video evidence can be tampered with, and the white noise I talked about earlier on. I think this event is important because it was before all that. So if we accept what the people are telling us are true, and some of them are credible witnesses, have got no reason to make it up, then I think it's a really interesting event that pushes back, how long these events have been going on for.
Throughout the world. Yeah,
Throughout the world. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, do your colleagues know that you've released this book as well, or?
Yes, some friends do. Yeah, yes. Been very supportive. Very, very interesting. What did you do in lockdown? Well, I wrote a book on UFOs. It's always a good way to start a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, interesting times we live in, and this has come out at an interesting time as well, and it's available from all good bookstores. We'll put a link to the description of the of your Facebook page and the book in the description below.
It's an Amazon, Kevin, so available on Amazon. So if people just search up the Lights Upon the Hills, and it's available on paperback or Kindle. And a good tip is, if you get on Kindle and you look at it on a tablet, then the pictures are all in color, and it's a very nice copy. So yeah, bit of a tip for people there.
Perfect. Okay, well, I will link all that below, and
that's great.
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
No, Kevin, absolute pleasure. Real pleasure talking to you. Thank you ever so much.